Good morning. Minister Xueyuan, Professor David Lampton, Professor Gordon Houlden, our distinguished panelists, and all our participants physically here and also virtually. We'd like to extend a warm welcome all of you to ICAS 2023 Annual Conference. My name is Nong. I am the Executive Director of the Institute for China-American Studies. As an independent think tank based here in Washington, D.C., ICA's job is to facilitate exchange of ideas and research on many of the key issues affecting or concerning the U.S. China relations. We are so delighted to have you here in person after 4 years gap. Our last full in-person conference went all the way back to April 2019. Before we start, I would like to take the opportunity to thank our co-organizers and also strategy partners, China's National Institute for South China Sea Studies and the China Institute of University of Alberta of Canada, and the Carter Center, and also Beijing Club for International Dialogue. I think through our cooperation, working with these organizations, that we've been able to put together today's program to facilitate discussion on many of the crucial topics on U.S.-China relations. Let me just say a few words about the background of today's conference. During our last year annual conference, we've been trying to discuss the prospect of U.S.-China relations in 2023, following the U.S. midterm election and Chinese 20-party Congress. So I think it's our believing that in the past year, we have been seeing a backdrop of intensified competition in various arenas of U.S.-China relations. So simultaneously, efforts and endeavors to address the disparity and pursue cooperation persist. This development carries extensive ramifications for the Asia-Pacific region and also many other global affairs. So during their meeting in Bali in November 2022, U.S. President Joe Biden and the Chinese President Xi Jinping outlined a framework for gradual in their bilateral relations. So what's important now is we're asking the question whether the two sides will be able to take some concrete measures to maintain and manage these bilateral relations. So the key question is to mitigate the foreseeable challenge, managing foreseeing crisis, and address existing obstacles. We're taking from there that we try to frame this year's theme as stopping Gray Rhinos, handling black swans, and removing the tiger blocking the way. So in light of these circumstances, and this year I cast 2023 annual conference, we are so excited to bring together so many leading experts in China-U.S. relations to evaluate the prevailing challenges and also investigate potential outlook of U.S.-China relations in 2024. We're eager to hear the insight from our esteemed panelists as they contribute to this important discourse. Without further ado, now let me invite Dr. Wu Shicun to give his opening remark. Dr. Wu served as the chair of Academic Advisor Board of the Institute for China-American Studies, and he's also the founding president of China's National Institute for South China Sea Studies. Doctor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Hong, Minister Xueyuan, Professor Dr. Lampton, Professor Gordon Houlden, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I would like to express my appreciation to our Chinese and American experts and academics who are attending the 2023 annual conference of the Institute for China-American Studies here in Washington, D.C. It has established in 2015, so far almost running for 8 years. So this is the first time for the Institute to have an in-person meeting here in 4 years. So last meeting in person was in 2019. So I'm very happy to meet my American friends who I have not seen for more than 4 years. Some of them we met either in China, Professor Lampton, Professor Gordon Houlden. We met in April in Hainan this year. So now I would like to take this opportunity to share my personal observations on China-U.S. relations, just in order to facilitate our incoming discussions. I believe that history has come to a moment to test the wisdom of the Chinese and American governments, and even the whole humanity. I'm confident that we can make history and create a new world of peaceful coexistence among greater powers. I have some opinions about this issue. First, the socialist trap only represents the past, not the future, rather than simply repeating itself. History keeps opening up a new path and seeking ways of coexistence. History will never allow China and the United States to repeat the socialist trap, because it could mean the destruction of the civilization, even the destruction of the earth. Second, the Russian-Ukraine conflict and the Israeli-Palestinian war have warned and continue to warn mankind that starting a war before thinking twice is a crazy and criminal act against oneself, their fellows, and even their opponents. The world will fall into darkness without winners. Third, China and the United States can transcend their past confrontation over interests and move towards harmonious coexistence and win-win outcomes. The two countries can learn from the other in cultural exchanges, with much to offer and nourish the other. Innovation in new technology and new energy are opening up a new path for mankind to go beyond fossil energy. China and the United States do not need to compete for resources in a zero-sum game as a greater power did in the past. As the world's largest developed economy, China has rapidly developing its domestic market, offering a path towards a virtuous cycle of internal supply and demand. In the future, China can basically meet its own needs in development without the industrial relocation and the market of the United States and Europe. It will become the largest market in the world, in my opinion. This will take away of historical basis of the socialist trap. China and the United States can empower the other with positive incentives from their own development. Fourth, the economic communities in China and the United States needed to make an intellectual contribution to exchanges between our two countries in political, economic, scientific, technological, social, and other fields. With a forward-looking vision and a firmness to rescue our relations, we needed to work closely to help remove risks in our relationship for its stable and long-term development. Finally, I would like to share with you my personal experience in friendly exchanges with the United States. From my college days to my career in government and academic research, I'm always struck by the extreme importance of the China-U.S. friendship. So I would like to say a few words from the bottom of my heart. Several years ago, Professor Lampton warned that the bilateral relationship of China and the United States was at a tipping point. Dr. Henry Kissinger said that the bilateral relationship couldn't return to the past. Dr. Graham Allison, the Harvard University professor, projected that our two countries could fall into the Thucydides trap. Now, I have no intention to comment on each of those remarks, but I do share their concerns about the future of our relationship. I still remember, in April 2019, I attended an academic conference in Atlanta. Carter Center, Professor Liu Yaowei is here to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the establishment of the diplomatic relations between China and the United States. During that event, former President Jimmy Carter shared those vivid episodes of his engagement with Mr. Deng Xiaoping. He said that he hoped both Chinese and American attendees cherish our bilateral relationship and the achievement we have accomplished over the last 4 decades. I'm personally an eyewitness of those achievements and the development of bilateral relationship. I studied and worked at Nanjing University for over a decade in 1980s and earlier 1990s. During those years, I witnessed the establishment of Johns Hopkins University, Nanjing University Center for the Chinese and American Studies, now Hopkins Nanjing Center, and the awarding of honorary doctoral degree to former U.S. President Junior George Bush by Nanjing University. The Hopkins Nanjing Center remains one of the most important landmarks of China-U.S. cultural exchanges and educational cooperation. In 1997, I participated for the first time the International Visitors Program. This program initiated and organized by then U.S. Information Agency, USIA, during which I experienced firsthand how different social and interest groups influence U.S. foreign policy. This trip left a strong mark in my following professional career. When I worked in Hainan province, the southernmost province of China, an island province, and I was responsible for its foreign affairs. I served as a head of Hainan Provincial Foreign Affairs for more than 10 years. I pushed for the sister relationship between the Hainan province and the state of Hawaii. And also, I was involved in dealing with the April 2001 EP3 incident. My academic background and my professional career also influenced my next generation. My daughter was majored in English at college and went to Purdue University of the United States for her master's degree. She got her first job at a U.S. company run in China, Accenture in Beijing, after she returned to China 6 or 7 years ago. just like me and my family, millions of Chinese share such kind of diverse connections with the United States. I have a very hard time to imagine the type and the level of decoupling that American politicians seek to achieve. Economic decoupling is not one of my topics today. I'm just stressing my feeling about forcing American people to cut people-to-people ties with their Chinese friends. Based on my experience and my understanding about the engagement, connection, and the communication between our two countries and our two peoples over the past 4 decades, economic decoupling seems to be an illusion. For many of us today, we are gathered here to fostering a stable, a healthy bilateral relationship. We have a shared aspiration. Our two countries enjoy peaceful and stable ties. Our two people maintain friendly connection, and our next generation do not have to pay the price for our wrong decisions today and inherit our current hostility. In conclusion, it's my hope that this annual conference will once again come up with vibrant ideas and solutions to many challenges we are facing now, to replace rivalry with collaboration, exclusivity with inclusivity, and challenges with opportunities, and articulate a new paradigm of ties that could reset the China-U.S. relationship and bring it back onto a stable track, at least for the next quarter century. I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor, for your great remark and then your kind words about the conference. And we also appreciate your willingness to share with us your personal experience in the U.S. China relations. Now, please join me in welcoming Deputy Chief of Mission and Minister Xueyuan from China's Embassy in the United States of America, and Professor David Lampton, Professor Emeritus of China Studies at School of Advanced International Studies, Johns Hopkins University, to share their views on the China-U.S. relations. The keynote dialogue will be moderated by Professor Houlden. He's Director Emeritus of China Institute, University of Alberta, and from Canada. Gordon is also a key member of ICAS Advisory Board. Please.
I can begin, I believe. Can you hear me clearly? Thank you very much, first of all, to Nong from ICAS and Dr. Wu from the National Institute of South China Sea Studies. It's been my great pleasure to work with these individuals who have devoted their lives to foreign policy interests of China, particularly in the case of U.S. China relations. Everyone in this room knows already that the obvious, that what happens between Beijing and Washington is critical to the peace and stability of the world. I come from a much smaller country, Canada, and while I've devoted much of my life to that relationship, our relationship with China, the truth is that if you could tell me in detail the state of of U.S.-China relations going forward, I could tell you, I think, a lot about where we would be, that is Canada, in terms of our relationship with China as well. We're profoundly affected by that. We're in this year, 2023, I would argue a year of great disarray. The Ukraine war, the first major armed conflict in Europe, tensions obviously during the Cold War, but a negative development then. Just in recent weeks, what's happening in the Middle East, These are two, but also overhanging this is what I would regard as the net negative state of U.S. China relations. I hope to hear other points of view, and from both Minister Xu and from David Lampton. But I have deep concerns. I've been coming to some of these meetings, either in China or here in the United States, and it seems that each one there are new problems that emerged, and some of the substantive structural problems have not been solved. There also is, of course, the risks of the accidental, the unexpected, which could plunge that relationship into crisis. I was delighted to hear, reminded by Minister Xu that she's worked earlier. She had responsibility for Canada-China relations. When she was there, I think things were rather more positive than they have been in the immediate last couple of years. But these relationships are going to be important for the whole duration of this century. And that relationship, Beijing-Washington, is key, I think, to the stability of the world political and economic system. Madam Xu, could I invite you to give your remarks on that relationship, please? But what I'm particularly interested in is the question of your expectations for the bilateral, which is coming up next month, between the two presidents, President Biden and President Xi, and what are your expectations for that critical meeting? Your choice, but you can speak from here if you wish. You can speak from here or go to the...
I would prefer to give my, opening remarks behind the podium here. I just feel standing makes me feel more comfortable. So I can look at the whole room and look at each and everybody of you. Lots of people talked about the lessons of the pandemic. I think one lesson, which is very important is, although no matter how advanced information technology can be, in-person dialogue and communication is irreplaceable. Professor Houlden talked about the China-U.S. relationship and also briefly touched upon the China-Canada relationship, which I oversaw before I joined the Chinese embassy in the United States for the second time. And also Professor Wu Shichun's remarks brought back lots of very, very fond memories. I can say the memories of the good old times in China-U.S. relationship. I don't think it is the right venue to discuss China-Canada relationship. If I have the chance to talk about it, I think I'll be more than happy to do so, because I can also tell lots of old happy memories of that relationship. But today I'd like to mainly focus on China-U.S. relationship. With joint efforts from both sides, the China-U.S. relationship has seen some positive developments recently. The most noticeable one, I think, is the increased numbers in exchanges and dialogues. Last week, President Xi Jinping met with the bipartisan delegation of the of U.S. Senate, led by Majority Leader Chuck Schumer in Beijing. Mr. Wu Shichun, in his remarks, talked about the important role of U.S. Congress. can play in this bilateral relationship. Actually, soon after the ice-breaking visit by President Nixon in 1972, after he returned, he advised the U.S. Congress that you might want to pay a visit to China by yourselves. And actually, those visits did take place. Actually, first, Senator Mansfield from Montana led a bipartisan Senate group to visit China. And I cannot remember the name of the U.S. House representative who led the other chambers bilateral group to visit China. It will be very interesting to read the reports they wrote to the White House or to the U.S. public after they returned to China, because they were surprised to see China was such a different country than what they have learned from U.S. media or what they have imagined on their own minds. And I think and I hope that the bipartisan congressional delegation led by Majority Leader Chuck Schumer can also help he and his members to at least change a little bit of their perception on China. But what I want to share with you today is some thoughts discussed between President Xi Jinping and this very important congressional delegation. I believe there are 4 key messages delivered by my President Xi Jinping. First, the way China and the U.S. get along with each other bears on the future of all mankind. Our 2 countries are respectively the largest developing country and the largest developed one. And the 2 are the leading economies in the world. Cooperation between China and the U.S. is good for both and the world at large, while confrontation harms all sides. In global governance, China-U.S. cooperation may not solve all problems, but no problem can be solved without such cooperation. President Xi has said many times, including to several U.S. presidents, that there are 1,000 reasons to get the China-U.S. relationship right, and there is no single reason to mess it up. This is especially true today. And the U.S. should demonstrate the broad-mindedness, vision, and readiness, rise to the occasion, act with a sense of responsibility to history, to the people, and to the world, and properly handle the bilateral relationship. Second, I think the second message delivered by President Xi is defining the entire China-U.S. relationship by competition would undercut both countries as well as the rest of the world. Competition and confrontation goes against the trend of the times. Still less can it fix one's own problems and address the challenges facing humanity. China and the U.S. are the 2 largest economies, and both are nuclear weapon states. Any conflict or confrontation between us would produce no winner, but bring unbearable consequences to the world. The planet Earth is vast enough to accommodate the respective development and common prosperity of China and the U.S. Taking China as the primary competitor and the most serious long-term challenge is a big misperception. China respects U.S. interest and does not seek the challenge or displace the United States. I'm just quoting exactly what was said by President Xi Jinping to President Biden. But he repeated this idea when he met with the U.S. Congress delegation. Respective success of China and the U.S. is an opportunity rather than a challenge to each other. The future of all peoples, countries, and individuals are interconnected. This wouldn't be changed by anyone or any force. In building a common community with a shared future for mankind, China pursues one world, one family, and the U.S. is certainly a part of it. We hope that will be the case. The Belt and, last evening, the third Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation is open in Beijing. China sincerely invited the U.S. to participate, both when the Belt and the Road Initiative, BRI, was first proposed and when the first Belt and Road Forum was held. We reached out. We even sent a delegation to the White House to explain what was our intention. But unfortunately, the U.S. side refused our invitation. Today, this initiative has benefited more than 150 countries, established more than 3,000 cooperation projects, created 420,000 local jobs, and has become a global public good welcomed by the international community. We hope that it will also be welcomed by the United States. Third, win-win cooperation is the only viable choice for China and the U.S. Today's world is far from tranquil, with more instability and uncertainty. The global economy struggles to recover. The nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula has been lingering on for a long time. And the Ukraine crisis and the Palestinian-Israel conflict have not only devastated lives, but also disrupted global energy security, food security, and supply chains. The climate crisis is looming, and global public health challenges are severe. Nuclear safety is still hard to guarantee, and the major issues of setting rules and regulations for the development of artificial intelligence are ahead of us. I hope and I believe most of you have noticed that Dr. Kissinger expressed many times his concern on this issue, on what is the best way to set rules and regulations for the development of AI. And the list can go on and on. China and the US used to work together on many things, from intensifying macroeconomic policy coordination, tackling the financial crisis, and fighting Ebola, to facilitating the signing of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action on the Iranian nuclear issue, the JCPOA, and the Paris Accord on climate change. The two countries once worked together on international development assistance as well. China-US cooperation has offered a lot to both countries and the world at large. Going forward, we believe, and President Xi Jinping believes, whether it is promoting global growth or stabilizing international industrial and supply chains, whether it is stabilizing regional situations or meeting common challenges, whether it is addressing immediate challenges or opening up new frontiers, nothing gets done without cooperation and coordination between our two countries. This, I believe, reflects the shared desire of the two peoples and meets the common expectation of the people across the world. Fourth, the two sides should work together to find the right way to get along in the new era. The three principles outlined by President Xi Jinping, namely mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation, represent the right direction for the development of bilateral relations. Mutual respect is prerequisite for our interactions. China and the United States differ in many, many ways. China will by no means become the United States, and neither will the US become another China. Therefore, both sides should respect their people's choice of development path and respect each other's core interests and development rights. But it seems to us that in our daily discourse with our colleagues at White House, at State Department, and other government, U.S. government officials, they have huge problem in acknowledging the importance of mutual respect. We just cannot understand why. Peaceful coexistence is the red line we must keep on. No conflict or confrontation and a peaceful coexistence between China and the United States is the most basic common interest of our two countries. Any form of Cold War, hot war, trade war, or tech war is undesirable. The Chinese side welcomes the U.S. side's important commitment to China-U.S. relationship. And more importantly, we hope that the U.S. side can implement with real actions. We need real actions, much more than just words. Win-win cooperation is the goal that both parties should strive for, and it's also the natural result after the first two principles are observed. So I would just stop here. Thank you very much.
Can I now invite David you to give an American perspective, please?
Well, good morning. Good to see everybody this bright and early, chipper in the morning. I want to thank you, Minister Xu, for those remarks, and I look forward to the plenary and our individual discussion. I guess the first thing to say is I wanted to mention what my old friend, Professor Wu, had to say. And there's a very human dimension to our relationship, and I think to everybody in this room, one way or another, that's sort of the key dimension as well as state to state. And we've been invited in our remarks here to talk about the state to state relationship. And that's not good, it's conflictual, and it's getting worse. But there is another level to this relationship, and I think you indicated it, and you mentioned the Hopkins Nanjing Center, with which I've been affiliated since before it was founded, actually, in the planning stages. And I think that's a very real aspect of this relationship that, unfortunately, we may not spend as much time talking about as we need to. But just give you one thing that I think we all need to do. There are only approximately 350 Americans in China. There's no way we're going to have Sino-American understanding with that. And I don't want to cast blame, and there's plenty of blame to go around, but China's closing up to those people. In whether it's data sets, archival research, interviews, field research. All the things that I was able to do when I was growing up in this field, going out to the countryside, talking to peasants that were trying to figure out how not to get flooded. That was the level of reality I was introduced to. And quite frankly, China is not taking advantage of that great opportunity, thirst that Americans have to understand China. They're not there to subvert China. So there's a whole level of this society-to-society relationship that I think is key and is a big problem. But we've been invited to talk about the state-to-state relationship, so I will do it. And I want to be frank. I don't think this is the time for friends to sugarcoat the reality. I may be wrong in what I say, but it is what I think is the situation. I would like to be disabused. I want to really make three very quick points apropos of what we were asked to talk about here this morning, and the time is very brief. I think the first thing to say is it's a worthy goal to try to get back to last year's Bali agenda. I don't have a problem with that as an objective. But that is entirely insufficient as a goal for our relationship. So You won't hear much criticism of me of the efforts to get our two presidents together, the working groups that we've established, all to the good. We ought to put guardrails on the relationship, all these kind of things. But it's entirely insufficient. And I do applaud our ministers and other high-level officials getting together over the last almost year. I won't identify all of them, but we're all familiar with what they are. I certainly think it's desirable that our two presidents get together. But frankly, we haven't been able to even pick the lowest hanging fruit on the shortest tree. You could point to maybe a little improvement on air travel. If I'm really scraping the bottom of the barrel, we have a few more airplanes going each way. But the tickets are so expensive that a lot of people simply can't even afford to go, even if they were inclined. So I think thus far, the attempt to pick low-hanging fruit and establish guardrails has not, well, to put it gently, not gone very far. So no problem with the goals. I think we ought to try to continue, but let's not confuse progress with process. We got a process and no progress. That would be the one way I'd put it. Second of my 3 points, our respective domestic politics in both of our countries. It's not just U.S. elections. It's not just gridlock in the U.S. Congress. It's also the lack of transparency in China. I just went through the foreign ministry's press operation and looked at statements. And I can't tell you how many statements got the answer, "We will release information in due course." China is not, look, I've been dealing with China for 60 years. I wouldn't ever say it's been entirely transparent. But we are less transparent now than almost any time in my memory. So we've got domestic, and we can ask, why is China not as transparent as it was? I think the problems the U.S. has are self-evident to everybody in this room. So certainly we are not in either country in a state of domestic politics that makes solving these problems easy. So we surely should continue the process, but we need more transparency, and the United States, of course, needs to straighten out its self-evident and manifold domestic governance problems. And China does get sucked into those. The kind of politics here spills over into our bilateral relationship. And we could talk about that, but it's true for both our societies. This is just not a U.S. problem. Domestic politics making our foreign relations difficult to manage. But what I want to talk about in a little greater depth is the third point. And that is that both of our countries have come to distrust each other on 4 strategic issues. And what I believe is until we address and manage, I hesitate to say solve, these strategic issues, we're not going to be able to move very well in the first 2 zones that I talked about. First, I'll mention the 2 big, I think, and I speak only for myself, 2 big strategic problems we have with China at this point. And then I'll mention what I think. I'll be presumptuous and you'll correct me if I'm wrong. The 2 big strategic problems China has with the U.S. So this isn't about a one-way strategic error. This is, I would say, strategic problems on both sides. One, I remember early on in my career, I went to Bandung, to the Bandung meeting place, the Bandung line. And ever since that, the big word in Chinese foreign policy has been respect for territorial sovereignty. That's been really from 54 to recently, I would say February 4th, 2022, if I had to circle a date on a calendar, but respect for the sovereignty of borders recognized by the United Nations. And remember, Nixon went to China because we had strategic interests with respect to Eurasia and Russia, the Soviet Union, so forth. But in February of 2022, China really finds itself pretty strategically aligned with Russia, and quite frankly, develops a no-limits partnership and cannot find it in its diplomatic capability to say that Russia has invaded another sovereign country. This feeds the worst nightmare in every American's mind, and I think justifiably so. In short, China has allied itself in very real ways. Now, I will concede there are more things China could do to complicate Russia's behavior or facilitate it. So China, I recognize there's been some restraint there, but it's not reassuring because we're looking to what is the structure of the world, and if we've now tossed out the window sovereignty, that's a big problem. And so China's got to somehow reestablish the Bandung line here in a real way, not a rhetorical way. Second thing, I remember later in my career, 9/11 happened. And this is my second strategic problem. Who was practically the first head of state on the phone with George W. Bush after that, when Bush had said, "You're with us or against us"? You know who was on the phone? It was Jiang Zemin. And he said, "I'm with you." And there were a lot of things China couldn't do or didn't want to do or didn't have the capability to do, but it did facilitate the FBI and other agencies, customs authorities, looking at containers to making sure weapons of mass destruction weren't coming into American ports. And just that show of strategic solidarity was an enormous plus at that moment with George W. Bush, who was quite skeptical coming in about China. And we have many here, not least Dennis Wilder, know more about that than I do, but it always struck me. It was important. Well, let's look at China's response to Hamas attack on Israel. It's been either deafening silence or almost becoming like who's at fault here? Is terrorism, is it relative or absolute? And China's coming down on relativism here. And so I think these kinds of issues, where do China and the United States stand on resolving fundamental conflicts? And, you know, the rest, tariff levels and export controls, they're all desirable areas to work on and important, and I've been talking about it, but that's not the problem. That's the manifestation of the problem. Now, I did say, and I've tried to in my career, be even-handed. Now, of course, everybody thinks they're even-handed, and that's in the eye of the beholder. But I think the U.S. has made some strategic problems if I try to put myself into China's shoes. And for China, I'll just put it, we'll all understand the code here, but the United States has been nibbling away at the one China policy, certainly from China's point of view. I just happen to think there's no question about that. I think China thinks, and not without reason, that the U.S. has either drifted or drifted all the way to a one China, one Taiwan policy. Now, I'm not saying we have, but the Chinese I talk to seem to think we have, and there's certainly some evidence out there that would suggest that. And then finally, I think if you ask why did Deng Xiaoping move towards the United States, and we of course reciprocated here, it was because China thought America was consistent with its development aspirations. Development was the goal, and the U.S. was responsive to that. Well, China thinks, and I would say with some reason, that we are no longer supportive of China's economic progress. We've got to change that. So these are the issues I would hope our two presidents really talk about. Tariffs, export controls, they will follow if we adjust our strategic posture towards each other. And the rest, I think, is important but secondary. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, for your remarks. We have time for a couple quick questions we'd like to pose to each of you. And Madam Xu, at the outset, I mentioned the upcoming summit. I realize you're not going to be able to detail what the presidents are going to do next month, but in general, what are your expectations from the Chinese side for those meetings? What are your hopes and your assessment of what might be accomplished or needs to be accomplished at those meetings? Please.
Hello? Okay. Mr. Lampton talked about his hope on the possible President Xi and President Biden summit on the sidelines of the APEC in San Francisco. I personally believe that you just hit the points. And our two sides share differences, have differences on many issues. But I think more importantly, we must admit that we still share huge common grounds. And I can assure you that every time our two heads of state met in the history, especially between the meetings, for example, in Bali last year, between President Xi and President Biden, it has always been strategic. Both sides had a desire to clarify the misperception from each other, especially the Chinese side, because we believe that the root cause of the deterioration of China-U.S. relationship is the misperception from the United States on China's strategic intention. So we have made, President Xi Jinping himself had made huge effort to try to explain to President Biden what is his plan. Him as the leader of China, a big country, what is his plan and his party's plan and his government's plan for his country. That's the reason why that all the planned meetings, for example, the planned time were like an hour, but the actual time for the two heads of states always were extended because both sides felt that they have so many topics to discuss. I think it is important, it is useful, and what President Xi told President Biden many times is, well, the concept of mutual respect, the importance of China feels respected by the United States. This is the basic, this is the foundation of our bilateral relationship. So you may ask that what do the Chinese side or do President Xi Jinping mean by respecting China's core interests? I think he made it very clear that, 4 areas, they bear on the core interest of China. They are the bottom lines or the red lines on the side of the Chinese. One is Taiwan question. The other one, the second one, is democracy and human rights. The third one is the issue about path and the system, our path to development and our political system, or our economic system. And last one, the fourth one, actually is about development rights. Mr. Lampton talked about, at least the Chinese side feel that the United States is not willing to welcome a economically more stronger China. And many Americans believe that over the past years, it was the United States who helped the China to prosper, to rise. But China has not been thankful. China, the United States has been taking advantage of, the United States has been taken advantage of by the Chinese side. We cannot accept this argument. Well, of course, that a constructive and cooperative relationship between China and the United States helped a lot on China's course to modernize its economy and to provide its people with a better life. But basically, it's the policies made by the Chinese government, made by the Communist Party of China. And it's the diligent, the Chinese people's hard-working Chinese people's effort that have made it possible for China to rise. And we used to be very appreciative. We used to be very appreciative of U.S. willingness to work with us to realize mutual benefit. The U.S. also benefited greatly from China's rise. But now it seems that China become a scapegoat of many issues in the United States, domestic problems. That is not fair. On Taiwan, I do not want to spend too much time on this issue. Everybody understands, well, this is the real, the core interest of the core interests. So if the core interest of China cannot be well respected, it will be extremely, extremely difficult for us to say, yes, let's just, put Taiwan issue aside and let's work happily together with you on other issues. I don't think that will be possible for us.
Thank you very much, Minister Xu. Question, thank you. David, a question for you. You spoke and mentioned the reality that for every state, domestic politics plays on foreign policy. We are on the cusp of the 2024 electoral cycle. You skirted that, but I'd like to know directly from you, what are your views on what may be the effects on the bilateral relationship into next year as the presidential election approaches?
Well, I didn't think I skirted it. I thought I was fairly succinct and direct, but let me...
You were direct. Maybe just tease out a few more of your views.
But in terms of our domestic politics, I think the sense that we need to get something done by November of this year, if we're going to make progress, it better be this year, would have been my basic viewpoint. Now, of course, recent developments in the Mideast have further complicated things. But basically, I think the further we go into next year, the more unmanageable. Well, let's put it this way. Put it positively, it's going to be very difficult to make any progress, and we'll be talking about how to limit the problems and so forth. I may be in error with this number, but I think recently I heard there are over 450 pieces of legislation at various points of the two houses of the U.S. Congress, and I can almost guarantee you at least 449 of those are not going to do our relationship any or much good. So when Congress gets back and in campaign mode, and if we get a Speaker of the House, which we will at some point, and that there is no Speaker candidate that is going to have a constructive relationship with China as its first, second, or third priority. So I would say, basically, if you think there is low-hanging fruit, then I would like to see our presidents get together and delegate people to solve the problem and not come back until they have solved it. But I don't detect that either side is giving its subordinate negotiators that kind of. So my basic sense is sooner rather than later, next year is going to be very bad. I would just say, because we always talk more about U.S. politics because it's obvious, it's pretty much an open book, at least at one level. China's got politics, and I have the sense, and I'd be glad to be enlightened about those politics, but it doesn't seem like it's conducive to a high degree of being perceived as too conciliatory to the United States, to put it delicately. So let's not talk about just this problem as only the U.S. has politics. I think politics is becoming more difficult in China. Now, I have less detail on that, and I'm glad to be informed, but that's my view.
Thank you, David. Quick question for Hong Nong. We are quite advanced in time. Do we have time for a question from the floor? 5 minutes. Please, I'd invite questions from the floor. I think a mic will be provided to you. Please.
Hi, my name is Mark Cohen from UC Berkeley. I'm wondering if anybody can provide some insight into the U.S. China Science and Technology Agreement, which was endured great controversy. I see Dennis Simon over there. I think he and I are more or less on the same page, but the U.S. committed, I guess, to renegotiate that agreement, but I've heard nothing. I've had inquiries from friends at the Chinese embassy, and I've told them what I think needs to be done to improve upon that agreement. That's a great concrete opportunity for improvement. It's low-hanging fruit, at least in the sense that there is a commitment to renew, and if we fail to renew, it will probably have adverse consequences. So that's my low-hanging fruit, at least in terms of something that's on the agenda.
Thank you very much. Perhaps a quick reply from each of you, and then we'll take a question from Victor Gao, please. Minister, do you wish to address that question of the agreement, or David?
Well, I think I can say I'm 200% sure that you're right in pointing out that this can be a low-hanging fruit for our bilateral relationship. But the obvious low-hanging fruit, I'm afraid, will be a very high-hanging fruit, or I'm not sure even it can be a fruit for a bilateral relationship. Professor Lampton talked about domestic politics. I agree. Every country has its own domestic politics. As we say, when I heard my colleagues, seniors, told me that when I joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that you must remember that foreign policy is the extension of domestic policy. That's very true. But I think we also need to admit that there is much, much, much more much, 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 much more domestic politics in the United States than in China. I personally don't think our U.S. policy is driven by our domestic politics. I think it is driven by and shaped and designed and shaped by our own national interest. It is driven by the aspiration of the 1.4 billion people, and it is driven by the aspiration to achieve a shared future for mankind. But well, I also agree that personally, I'm not quite confident or quite optimistic on how much longer, how big a window opportunity we are talking about in stabilize this relationship. Maybe in the next several months, but I'm not sure about what will happen next year. I think it is very likely, if not, it is very likely that next year will become very, very nasty in the United States. Well, lots of Republicans or Democrats will want to use China as a scapegoat to score political points for themselves in the campaign. And talking about the agreement, actually it is a perfect example of China-U.S. win-win cooperation. I don't know what do you think about the concept of win-win, but very interestingly, after I came here for my second posting in the United States, I heard many people inside of the Beltway telling me that you have to stop talk about win-win. Win-win is a bullshit. It is the exact words used by a very senior official in the US government. And people say that when you Chinese talk about win-win, for us, it's China win twice, win 2 times. I think that is bullshit. That is bullshit. So why I'm saying that it is a mutually beneficial agreement? Now, we used to have 400,000 Chinese students studying in the United States before the pandemic. Now the number dropped to 300,000. But still, China still remains to be the largest source of overseas students, for the United States. Mm-hmm. Well, so why this student exchange can take place? Because there's a protocol under the agreement, the China-U.S. Science and Technology Agreement, that provides opportunity for China and the United States to send each other, their own students, young people. And Mr. Lampton also talked about the very small number of U.S. students studying in China. We would like to welcome more. Look at the President Biden, when he was vice president, he worked together with President Biden and make the 100 a very, very innovative and very useful program that is called the 100,000 Strong initiative, right? Yeah, this initiative helped to make mutual exchange of students possible. But now we would like to have invite more American students to study in the United States. But look, if you were the parents of a U.S. college student, you might want to check the travel advisory posted by the U.S. State Department. China is level 3. I talked with, I would not want to expose her name, but I talked to a very nice lady who has a very important student exchange NGO in the United States. When I told her that China is level 3, she told me, what? China is level 3? If China is level 3, the United States must be level 5. Thank you.
Thank you. Very briefly, David, then we'll go to Victor. Please.
Yeah, I did want
with
to
the mic,
react
sorry.
to the I did want to react to the S&T. I think that's extremely important. I'm not fully acquainted with all the details of the current status, but my impression is that it seems like unlikely, or at least highly debatable, whether we will be able to continue in the broad direction that we have said since 1979. And Dennis Simon, who's here, I'm sure is going to talk much more about that, but my own personal view is it's not going very well. For myself, I'm very invested in that because Deng Xiaoping, when he came here, signed that agreement in '79, and shortly after that, I went with the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare to sign both the health and education agreements that I believe have been extremely successful. I think it'd be a tragic and a strategic blunder for us not to sign an S&T agreement. I just simply wouldn't want to predict that's going to happen, or at a minimum, it's going to be different, I would hypothesize, than, so tragic loss of opportunity. I'm not so sure how low that low-hanging fruit is, but it ought to be. I think it's been win-win in the sense of one win on each side here. And I just think to cancer research as an example. But there are many fields the United States has gained great knowledge from access to China and its people, and not to mention China studies, which is a whole, and social science study as well. So I hope everybody in this room will do everything they can to encourage movement towards a meaningful signing or extension of the previous one. But at best, it seems iffy to me. Just one last thing that I want to make sure gets in here. And the domestic politics uncertainty isn't just China or the U.S. It's Taiwan's got an election coming up, too. So we've talked about different zoo animals, rhinos and black swans. Well, you know, we got another party out here that has its own politics.
Thank you, David. We're already encroaching on the next session, but I've promised Victor Gao a quick question. If you could please, Victor Gao. I think it'll come on automatically, or have another.
Hello. Maybe I just speak louder. Thank you very much, Gordon. Thank you, the two distinguished keynote speakers, for very wonderful speeches. The timing of our meeting today cannot be better because it dovetails with the BRI summit in Beijing. So allow me to ask a very brief question. If you use your most optimistic forecast, can you see a day where the United States will participate in the BRI down the road? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. Perhaps briefly from each. Perhaps David first, and then Mr. Xu.
Well, I've been interested not so much in BRI per se, but China's building infrastructure in Southeast Asia. So a topic of great interest. And I think in the sense that you asked the question, can I imagine the U.S. signing on to BRI is a general statement. I think we answered that question, broadly speaking, when we talked about our decision in, what was it, 2015, the AIIB decision, I think signaled our general attitude. Now, of course, from time to time, if China put out public tenders, American companies could bid on, you know, lots of different American companies might choose to participate. So I think as a state decision, the U.S. I can't foresee, and I don't speak for the U.S., but I can't foresee us endorsing it. If China were to open up tenders and invite American firms in, I suppose depending on the technology in question, the U.S. might have a favorable view, but that'd be the state versus private sector decision. But I don't see us formally associating ourselves with it. My own personal view is I wish in some cases we'd get more involved. I don't like the assumption that everything China does in the world is a bad idea. Occasionally China has some good ideas. I wish we were more discriminating, but our political system's a pretty blunt instrument.
Thank you, David. Madam Xu, would you wish to add a comment?
Well, I think I'm sensitive of the time, so I would just give a very brief answer to Mr. Gao's question. I think, on the day when the U.S. think win-win is achievable, and on the day when the U.S. policymakers believe that by working with China on areas like helping the developing countries, the less developed countries, to share the prosperity of the more developed world, can both benefit those countries and also China and the United States. I think that day will be the day then they will want to, join maybe BRI. And I really want to add one more animal to today's meeting, because you at least use the three, the rhinos, the tigers, and also the swans. And I think the pandas, the giant pandas can also help. They have been very, very helpful.
Yes.
And in the next 50 years, and even longer, the giant pandas, I think sometimes they can even help more than we diplomats. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Xu. I look forward to pandas coming back to Washington. Please join me in thanking both of our speakers.
I wish we'll continue the debate and the dialogue, but we have to end. And thank you, Professor Lampton, Minister Xi, and Gordon, for setting such a great stage for discussion. We're a little bit behind the schedule, so I would suggest we quickly grab some coffee and then return as soon as possible so that we can start the first panel, which is going to be moderated by Dr. Liu Yawei, who is the special advisor for China Program Carter Center. I'll see you a bit.